Okie, sorry about that. I feel like I took a moment to get started. I was just trying to make sure this was floating on top. So this is going to be video for 6.2, which is adding and removing and using functions or methods on groups. This one's kind of weird. I was struggling to come up with a good program to use as an exemplar for this without just copying directly from the notes. So just stick with me here and hopefully this gives a bit of a description that makes some sort of sense. So what I've done here is I've created a little Romeo Juliet simulation, I guess. We've got the Montagues on the left over here with Romeo, the Capulets on the right over here with Juliet, and I will zoom into the code so we can start taking a look. First, I made a background color. We'll actually deal with that a little bit later in the program. And then I created my Romeo and Juliet objects. They're both labels. Romeo is an R and Juliet is a J. Then I made a Montagues group, which is comprised of Romeo and then 3 M's for Montagues. And then I made a Capulets group, which uses the Juliet that we made earlier on line 4, and then a bunch of C's for Capulet. I also created a group called Star-Crossed for whenever Romeo and Juliet meet, they'll join that group together. And so now here comes the first thing that I want to talk about here. We've shown creating groups. Oh, why is it scrolling oddly? Whatever. We've talked about creating groups, and you can create objects to put in those groups that you're storing in variables that you can manipulate outside of just manipulating the groups. We've talked about just adding an object that just belongs to the group. It'll always follow the group rules. Or we even talked about creating subgroups further up and then putting those subgroups into bigger groups. So we've already got that. What we're looking at now is just when you have a group, you can do weird stuff to it, basically. You can, not weird stuff, but you can, treat it like an object itself in certain ways, even though a group is really a collection of different objects. So over here, I have commented out 2 lines of code that will add Juliet and add Romeo. So before I even get to that, though, let's actually just look at what the program looks like right now. So I've got the Montagues and Romeo, the Capulets and Juliet, and I have some stuff going on where whenever I, type in up, down, left, or right, the Capulets all move around. Whenever I click and drag, the Montagues all move around. And so because Romeo and Juliet are part of the Montagues and the Capulets, when I move the Capulets to the Montagues, they move as well. If I were to get rid of Juliet from the Capulets group and I were to get rid of Romeo from the Capulets group, from the Montagues group, and I try running the program now, the Montagues will move on their own, the Capulets will move on their own, but Romeo and Juliet are going to stay still. Now, like I was saying before, we could just do what we already had, where we just put Romeo and Juliet. What's going on here? Why did it select everything when I ended that? We could just have Romeo and Juliet just added to the group as we define the group. But you can also, for whatever reason you might want to, later on in your program, manually say, hey, we already have a Capulets group. I'm going to Capulets.add Juliet, and I'm going to Montagues.add Romeo. So now the groups didn't start out with Romeo and Juliet, but because on lines 20 and 21, I added Juliet to the Capulets and Romeo to the Montagues, I now will have the program running like it did before, where Juliet moves whenever the Capulets move, and Romeo moves whenever the Montagues move. Sorry if I'm going to keep mixing those up. Now let's keep going. Over here, wow, I don't know why. Maybe I'm going to have to turn off a couple extra tabs or programs because this feels like it's kind of running weird. Anyways, on my mouse drag, I have the code that makes the Montagues move. I also have some code that's checking if Romeo ever meets Juliet. So it's checking if Romeo.hits shape Juliet, we're going to instead add Juliet and Romeo to the star-crossed lovers group, or just the star-crossed group. So let's see what happens there. Let's move it. Romeo meets Juliet, and now Romeo and Juliet are added to a star-crossed group, and the Montagues are moving on their own. Romeo is moving to his own tune now. One thing worth noting, you can do, this is another thing that we're allowed to do, is you are allowed to say Montagues dot remove Romeo, and this would take Romeo out of the Montague group, but we don't need to bother doing that because when we move something from one group to another, it automatically gets taken out of that other group. Apparently, that's what I could see from me playing around. The documentation isn't fully like descriptive of exactly how it's happening. And you do need to be careful when you use remove, which is why I didn't use it here, because if something doesn't belong to a group and it's removed, it gets like it gets turned invisible or maybe deleted entirely. It's kind of weird. Honestly, if you remove something, I'm not even going to bother going into it. Try removing something and then try adding it back. But then also before you add it back, try making it visible. It's honestly a bit confusing to me, so I'm not even going to bother. Maybe I shouldn't have even said that. And then on key press, let's keep going here. We've got the code that moves the Capulets. I also have code that will move the star-crossed lovers. So the Capulets move with the up, down, left, right key. The star-crossed lovers, whenever they get added to a group, will move with WASD. So let's see that. I can move the Montagues and Romeo. I can move the Capulets and Juliet. Whenever Juliet and Romeo meet, which, whenever they meet, they join their own group. Now, if I press up, down, left, to right, the Capulets are moving on their own. Juliet's not following them. When I click and drag, the Montagues are moving on their own. And if I do WASD, Romeo and Juliet are now moving together. I also included a spot where, wow, sorry that I'm having such difficulty maneuvering this stuff around. I don't know what's going on. I also included some stuff where, Juliet hits Romeo, that gets added, it just goes either way. Right, in the Montagues movement, if Romeo hits Juliet, we add them to star-crossed lovers. In the Capulets movement, if Juliet hits Romeo, they also get added to the star-crossed lovers. That's what's going on over there on 65 through 67. I also have, once I have the star-crossed lovers in a group together, I can bring them to the back and hide them, or I can bring them to the front. This is just to show that to groups, you can use the two back and two front methods. And not every single method is going to work with groups, but a lot of different methods and properties, and I encourage you to play around with them, do work when you create groups of objects. So I'll just show that right now. If I press B, now Romeo and Juliet are kind of behind the scenes a little bit. If I press F, we bring them back to the front, showing that a group, star-crossed, again, if you look back at the top here, is a group. A group can use two back and two front methods as well. It's not just objects that need to do that. And then finally, I have a thing where if we have things inside the star-crossed levers group, you can also, just like how we were showing that you could use to back or to front on groups, you can use groups.hitShape, and this is going to check if any shape in the Capulets group is hitting any shape in the star-crossed group. And here you'll see I can try, if the Capulets catch Romeo and Juliet together when they're in the star-crossed group, we'll remove Romeo and remove Juliet from the star-crossed group. And then once they're not attached to some group, for whatever reason, they kind of go invisible and they don't exist anymore, which, again, weird, but whatever. So let's see, running it around, Juliet's moving around, they meet, they're happy, and they're trying to, hide their love, they come back out, whatever, why don't you love me? And then they run into the Capulets, and they get removed whenever they hit the Capulets. So, anyways, I don't know, this is the best example I could give over here, a dumb little program. I'll try to remember to post this code so you can copy it and play around with it yourself if you'd like. The big idea to get across is you can, later on in your program, add individual objects to groups. You can do that, just on your own or inside of an if, so you check until something happens and then you add something to a group. You can use groups, like star-cross as a group, and then do dot two back or two front, and lots of other different methods will work. You can also remove objects from groups, and to check that, we did something also that was cool where you can check if any object in a group is hitting any object in another group, or you can just check if it hits a particular object. Maybe I should have done, if the Capulets hit Romeo, we're just removing Romeo from the situation because they're trying not to kill Juliet, even though that's not what happens. So let's see. They get together, bada boom. If the Capulets hit Romeo, boop, Romeo dies. So anyways, that's the video. Groups are pretty cool. And we're moving on in the next video to step functions, which are super cool. So stay tuned.